We'll discuss some inyane gerus. We'll discuss a little bit about the process of conversion. What is necessary to go from Gentile to Jew. So there's an interesting Gemara in Krisos on Daf Tes, which points out that there's this three-step process to the gerus process. There is the milah, the circumcision, the tefillah, the immersion, and the karban, and bringing a karban. So we'll come back to milah and tefillah in a moment, since those are the practical ones. But the Gemara says part of the process for a ger to become a Jew is by bringing a karban. So today then maybe we can't have converts, because since we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we don't have a karban, we don't bring sacrifices today. So maybe we can't have convert today. So the Gemara says no, we learn out from the pasuk with Doro Sechem that even all future generations we're going to have gerim, and therefore we learn out that bringing a karban is only an issue when you can bring a karban. Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kayam, then you have an obligation to bring a karban. But Bisman Hazeh, when there is no karban, so it's not a impediment for one to become a Jew. Just like the Gemara, the Rishonim talk about in a different context, that you need a gerus of smuchim. You need someone who have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu. And we don't have that today, so how is it possible we have gerim? So the Gemara, the Rishonim give answers. One quote with Doro Sechem, that since God knew that we weren't going to have smuchim, so therefore that is clearly not a prerequisite in the time when we don't have them. So either way, that's a discussion regarding the karban. There's also interesting discussion regarding the karban, whether they had the same status as a milah and tefillah. So you didn't bring a karban. Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kayan, would that be an impediment to the gerus? Or you still be a Jew, except that you still are lacking in your mitzvah of bringing a karban. And in fact, the Gemara quotes that a ger today, a ger who converts today, Bisman HaGemara, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, even though they can't bring a karban today because there is no Beis HaMikdash, but they must designate money put aside, that when the Mehira Yibana Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash should be rebuilt, so then they'll take that money and they'll buy a karban with it and bring it. However, the Gemara says Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai discontinued the practice because of the concern of Ma'al Behekdash, Me'ila Behekdash, that they might, if you designate this money for holy purposes and then you use it for some other non-holy purpose, so that's a violation, it's trespassing. You're using someone else's money, and therefore they discontinued the practice not to set it aside because it's going to cause more problems than good. However, as the Rambam points out, that even though we don't do like Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai anymore, and we don't ger does not designate money for the karban, nevertheless the Rambam writes, all gerim, when the Mehira Yibana Beis HaMikdash and the Jews, the converts that are going to be around when we have the temple, so they'll have to go ahead now and bring a karban. The karban they never brought when they couldn't bring, so they'll have to bring it upon the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. Because as the Gemara in Krisos tells us, Navches Amid Beis, that a ger, Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kaya, when the temple was up, if they didn't bring a karban, they weren't even allowed to eat kachim, eat from the holy food. And in fact, that leads the Avnei Nezer to ponder the following question, whether a ger today, someone who became a convert today, So the question is now, when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and he has to bring a carbon yet, can he eat the kachim or not? So that's his question. So he says, he concludes yes. He says, from the fact that we know a convert marries a Bas Yisrael, a Jew, and he's considered a Yid for everything, so therefore it's not a problem. They have the Nazir rights, he can eat kachim and do everything. But the fact that he doesn't have to remarry again, he says, the Geras shows the Geras is complete. And of course the Ger will still have a mitzvah to bring a carbon, but it doesn't affect the actual Geras. And the Zecher Yitzchak quotes from the Bali Tosfos that he seems to on the daf here, that seem to apply that upon the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, a convert will have to bring a carbon to complete the conversion. So it's mashma that they can't eat kachim and perhaps even be prohibited from marrying a Bas Yisrael if they converted before but they're not married yet, now they want to marry a Jew. So the Zecher Yitzchak ponders whether they have to bring a carbon first. He seems to be thinking that yes, they do. So either way, so whether the machlokas, the Avnei Nezer, Zecher Yitzchak, but Pashas we assume it's a ger l'chol davar, and everyone agrees, minimally speaking, there's a mitzvah for a ger to bring a carbon. Whether how much is an impediment to do anything else, that's an issue in the Achronim, but he definitely has to bring one. In fact, the Shiloh comes up, but let's assume, so if you assume that you're not a Jew without a carbon, you got to bring Mila, Tefillah, and a carbon, so there's nothing to talk about. Let's say you assume there's Mila and Tefillah, you could be a Jew, but a carbon is a mitzvah and a mufcha, you're supposed to do it. So let's say Bizban Beis HaMikdash Kayam. Someone did Mila and Tefillah, but they didn't bring a carbon. So, okay, so let's assume they're Jewish. According to some, maybe they're not, but let's assume, according to the opinion, that all you need is Mila and Tefillah and Kabbalah's mitzvahs. So is there any problem not bringing a carbon? So obviously there's a mitzvah to bring a carbon and you're nullifying a positive commandment, but is there any negative that could happen? To some, perhaps, one could suggest, based on a Turi Evan, the Beis HaLevi quotes this Turi Evan in a different context, but maybe we can apply it here, that the Turi Evan talks about the principle about Tosef and about Tigra. There's a biblical prohibition to add a 614th mitzvah called Baal Tosef, and there's a biblical commandment, biblical prohibition to make 612 to Baal Tigra, about take away. So it's a whole discussion, what is Baal Tigra, about it. The classical understanding is you put 3 parashos in the tefillin, or you put 5 parashos in the tefillin, that's Baal Tosef, Baal Tigra, same thing in Lulav. That's the whole discussion. The Turi Evan's sheet to the Beis HaLevi quotes is that, let's say, not doing a mitzvah b'shrei muso. If you only put 3 minim in the lulav or 3 parashos, you did nothing. You didn't fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of lulav. But Baal Tigra is that really you could fulfill the mitzvah without doing this. But the mitzvah b'shrei muso is that I do this extra thing, and if you don't do it, that's considered Baal Tigra. So, let's say by karbanos, there's a certain type of karbanos that you have to sprinkle on one corner, some have 4 corners. Different karbanos have different amount of corners you have to sprinkle on. So they point out that so certain karbanos, if you require 4 and you only do 1 or 2, so then you've done nothing. But there are others that if you do 1 or 2, it's good, but you didn't do the mitzvah b'shrei musa. So Turi Evan, right, that's Baal Tigra. You violate Baal Tigra, you violate the biblical prohibition of taking away from the Torah when you do a mitzvah shelo b'shleimuso. It's that the mitzvah counts, but if you don't do the mitzvah, you're not doing the mitzvah b'shleimuso, you're in a violation of Baal Tigra. That's what Rav Shechter pointed out as well regarding the whole issue of the Techeles. The Techeles controversy, the issue of whether we found Techeles today or not. There's halacha regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis. The one is obligated, if one is wearing a four-corner garment, he's obligated to put on tzitzis. So we know tzitzis is you put on the four corners. So there's a halacha in the Torah that we read about Psil Techeles. In addition to having the threads, when we had the chilazon, the appropriate fish or snail, we took out the dye and we dyed the tzitzis, just like we do by Big Day Kahuna. By Big Day Kahuna you need techeles also, and by Big Day Kahuna there's something to talk about. If you don't have the appropriate Big Day Kahuna, you can't do the avoda. You can't do it. So therefore, it's none of the issue about Tigra, it's just not going to happen. But regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis, it's the machokes in the Mishnah, in the Rishonim, whether tcheles is ma'akev etzalavan or not. Let's say you wear tzitzis without tcheles. So, or let's say because you don't have tcheles. So the Baal Amor's opinion is, I think it's Rabbi's opinion, that there is no mitzvah. If you don't have tcheles, there is no mitzvah. So the Ramban writes, the Baal Amor did not wear a tallit. He did not keep the mitzvah of tzitzis, but he felt it doesn't apply. We don't follow that opinion. We assume that the mitzvah of tzitzis applies even without the cheles. So therefore, we wear tzitzis today. So the question happened was, it's been happening for a while, but it started with the Radvina, Rabbi, Rav Herzog, others got involved in finding the techeles. So it's a question whether you found the techeles or not. So those who say like there's no chance, there's nothing to talk about, there's no chance that it's techilazon. Others say they think it's a good chance. At least it's a doubt, it raises to a level of a doubt. Safek daraisa chumra, doubt regarding a biblical mitzvah you have to be strict on. But no one says the Torah is vadai, meaning because bisman, when we had riyat techeles, you're allowed to wear a linen garment, put on wool tzitzis, and then dye, you dye the blue. Wool and linen is usually a biblical prohibition of shatnez. We're going out aseh dochalos aseh from here. From the smichas of Harshas, we see that the positive mitzvah of tzitzis, gedilam taselach, overrides the isser of shatnez. So, generally speaking, but so if you believe you had tcheles b'vadai, you'll be able to do it here. So no one does it because no one actually thinks they know 100%. So let's assume it's only 50%, it's 20%. You're not sure. So Rav Shechter claims Savik Daraisa Chumra, and therefore one should wear tcheles today. So regarding the tcheles, Rav Shechter writes, based on this Turi Evan we quoted, that since today we have the tcheles, so if we have the tcheles, or at least we have Savik tcheles, and Savik Daraisa Chumra, so if we have Savik tcheles, and then we go ahead and this wear tzitzis without the lavan, you are in violation of Baal Tigra. You are in violation of the biblical prohibition, because you fulfill the biblical obligation of tzitzis with tzitzis alone, with lavan alone. But you need the tcheles to You need the tcheles to you need the tcheles to do the mitzvah b'shreimuso. So therefore he says, Rav Shach says it's a big chiddush. He writes, he wears tcheles, but he writes if you're not wearing tcheles, which is robe of a Klal Yisrael, he thinks you're better off not wearing tzitzis at all, because if you don't wear tzitzis at all, if you're not wearing a four-corner garment, it's not an ideal situation, but you don't violate anything. But if you're wearing a four-corner garment with the love and without tcheles, then you're doing the mitzvah shalol b'shreimuso in a situation where you can do it, at least misafek, and therefore he says one has to, based on tzavik deraisa l'chubra, one has to put on the tzitzis, one has to put on the tcheles. So that's our discussion whether we say tzavik deraisa l'chumra here regarding the tcheles. Do we say that it's the classical tzitzis is a mitzvah in the Torah? Is there any reason not to apply it? So there's a famous Rav Chaim, I think Rav Nachum Zember also says it, Shulchan Aruch, that when do we say Safek Daraisa or Chumrah? When do we say if the dowry regarding a biblical we have to be strict? That's only after we're strict we know that we've accomplished the mitzvah. But after we do the mitzvah again, we're back in the same situation we before. Let's say, I'm not sure if this salad medium is kosher, and I shook it at 9 a.m. So does it mean at 10 a.m. I have a mitzvah to shake it again? No, I'm not going to be any closer to my cause. So therefore, there's nothing I could do more, so I don't apply Shavik Torah Chumrah. However, no, right, so that's, however, the Rosh Hashanah points out there's a Ran in Sukkah which seems to say not that way, that even on a Shavik, we apply Shavik Torah Chumrah, even in a case where you're not going to know the conclusion. That's what they write, and that's our discussion. Whether you can make a distinction. So he says Rav Chaim's going against the Ran, and therefore we go with the Ran and we say Shabbat Torah Tzachum. We had Tcheles. So Shlomo Miller from Toronto, he points out that no, Rav Chaim really isn't going against the Ran. Everyone's in agreement. And therefore he says you wouldn't say Safek. So that's the issue whether you say Safek Daraisa L'chumra or not. But the issue is over here whether you'd apply about Tigra to not putting Tcheles on your tzitzis, like Rosh Hashanah claims, or, and that's similarly the issue regarding, it comes up by Chalitza, you have different parts which is Miyakev and not, so you have to know over there as well. But over here by the Karbanas, whether we say if by not bringing the Karban you're still Jewish, Bisman Beit Hamikdash, except you have a mitzvah to bring a Karban, so according to the Turi Even approach, perhaps that would be about Tigra, because you could do a mitzvah b'shrei muso and you choose not to, and therefore you're in violation of Baal Tigra.